The Far Cry series is a game series that I think gets a lot of undeserved hate. Yes, the microtransactions are bad, and Ubisoft is an awful company, but I think the Far Cry series itself is pretty good. Not every entry is a winner, but the ones that are winners are pretty great. So in preparation for Far Cry 7, which is probably going to get announced later this year, here's the Far Cry Iceberg. Before I continue, if you end up liking the video, leave a like. Maybe even comment below about your favorite entry. Or maybe even subscribe for more icebergs. I've got plenty on the way. And I've already made a bunch of them, like ones based on Marvel, DC, Dead Space, Godzilla, Call of Duty, Battlefield, Gears of War, Halo, Cyberpunk 2077, etc. So with all that out of the way, let's begin. Voss is alive. As revealed at the end of Far Cry 6's Insanity DLC, Voss somehow survived the events of Far Cry 3. In fact, not only did he survive the events of Far Cry 3, he's still alive. He's shown to be alive in 2021, with a tennis ball that he shaped to resemble Jason. Now, it's unknown where he is in the DLC, but we do know that at some point in 2021, he traveled to Yara, as you can see him passed out at a bar during the ending of the Vanishing DLC. Although, that story might not be canon. It's weird. I'll talk about it in a few. Some have argued that Voss didn't actually survive the events of Far Cry 3, and that the scene showing him alive was just a non-canon what-if scenario. Although, I don't actually buy this, because the other secret endings to the villain DLCs, Pagan Min and Joseph Seeds, are both very clearly canon. So why would they just make one of these endings non-canon? Well, even if this was a non-canon ending, Voss is heard in the after-credits scene to Far Cry 6. The scene has Juan talking to a smuggler, voiced by Michael Mando, Voss's voice actor, and the smuggler mentions how Castillo killing his son was pretty crazy. So yeah, Voss is alive. So how did Voss survive Far Cry 3? Well, it's been speculated that it's been retconned that Jason was simply hallucinating killing Voss. Either that, or Voss just somehow survived his injuries. But regardless, Voss is alive, and I'm sure Ubisoft has plans for him. Secret endings. Starting in Far Cry 4, it's become a tradition for each mainline Far Cry game to have at least one secret ending that ends the game early. In Far Cry 4, at the very beginning of the game, if you listen to Pagan Min and just wait at the table for around 13 minutes, Pagan will return, and the two of you go and place Ajay's mother's ashes, all while Pagan Min talks about how Ajay's dad was a bit of a bastard. And after that, Ajay is recruited into Pagan Min's army. And that's the end. At the beginning of Far Cry 5, when given the option to handcuff Joseph, if you just stand there for a little bit, Sheriff Whitehorse will eventually come in and tell you to stand down. He then orders the deputy and their allies to leave the area, much to the confusion of Marshal Burke. Whitehorse then tells him that if they cuff Joseph Seed, they will all be killed. They then leave, and that's it. And finally, in Far Cry 6, after completing the prologue area, Danny will be given a small boat to use to get to America. If Danny actually uses the boat, the game will cut to them just chilling out on a beach in Miami, where they hear about the failed Yara revolution on the radio. This, of course, results in Clara's death. The deputy becomes the judge. When Far Cry New Dawn was released, many players speculated that the companion character, the Judge, was actually the deputy after being brainwashed by Joseph Seed, the deputy being the protagonist of Far Cry 5. The evidence for this is that the Judge's gender is never specified. They also never talk, and the few Far Cry 5 characters that return in New Dawn seem to recognize the judge.
Oh man, Death! Hey, look at you! Yeah! Wow, so much has changed since we last saw each other. Yeah, well, I'm a daddy now. Yeah, I got a little boy named Blade. And what about you, man? You're, what are you, some sort of death monster now, or... Sorry, I'm real nervous around you.
There's also various notes and journal entries you can find lying around the map that hint at the deputy becoming the judge. However, this theory was eventually flat out confirmed to be true in the Far Cry 6 Joseph Seed DLC mission, where we actually see the creation of the judge. Crossover skins. Because Ubisoft loves their microtransactions, various skins based on other franchises appear in Far Cry 5 and Far Cry 6's stores, mainly from other Ubisoft franchises, like Splinter Cell, Assassin's Creed, and Rainbow Six. Also, characters from other Far Cry games appear as skins in other games. For example, in Far Cry 5, you can play as Citra, Pagan Min, Voss, and Amita. But there's also the occasional crossover skin from franchises not owned by Ubisoft, like Breaking Bad, Rambo, and Stranger Things. Side note, not every crossover skin is available via microtransactions. Sometimes they're only available via the Ubisoft Club. Far Cry Instincts. Released in September of 2005 for the original Xbox, Far Cry Instincts is a remake of the original Far Cry. Plot-wise, the game is mostly the same as the original, with a few major changes. For example, in Instincts, Jack Carver gets mutant powers like night vision, super jump, scent tracking, and super speed. Instincts is also very different from the original in regards to its gameplay. Because of console limitations, Instincts is far more linear than the original Far Cry. To make up for that, the game introduces various new features, like the ability to
dual wield
your guns, and use traps. You got claymores and some spiked tree branches that send people flying. Instincts even included multiplayer, which featured some brand new game modes. Despite these new additions, the game was looked at as a downgrade for not just its more linear nature, but also because of its inferior enemy AI. Despite it being viewed as the inferior version of Far Cry 1, Instincts actually received a direct sequel, that being Far Cry Instincts Evolution. Released in March of 2006 for the original Xbox, Far Cry Instincts Evolution is a direct sequel to Instincts. Continuing Jack Carver's story, this time, Jack is hired by a woman to guard an arms deal between the government of Micronesia and a bunch of pirates. While this is all going down, a third party steps in and causes chaos. These guys being rebels, who all have the same mutant abilities as Jack Carver. They then frame Jack for the murder of the pirate leader and the Micronesian governor. So Jack's basically stuck battling 3 different factions all at once. Evolution isn't the most popular game in the series, as it's often viewed as an expansion pack released at full price. It's viewed this way because Evolution's campaign is much shorter than the original. And Evolution's multiplayer is largely the same as the original, just with a single new game mode. But hey, at least Evolution's levels are far less linear. This wouldn't be the last of the Far Cry Instinct games though. No. There were actually quite a few more games. One of them being Far Cry Instincts Predator. Released in March of 2006 for the Xbox 360, yes, the exact same time as Evolution, Far Cry Instincts Predator is a remaster collection of Instincts and Evolution. No, really. Instead of just releasing Predator as a remaster of Instincts with a new bonus campaign, they released the bonus campaign as its own game for the previous console generation, the very same month the remaster was released. Genuinely one of the weirdest decisions ever. While I call it a remaster, it's more of like a slightly graphically enhanced port than a proper remaster. Because it's a compilation remaster, there isn't anything new added into the game. But it is probably the best way to experience both Instincts and Evolution, as this game is available on the Xbox One and Xbox Series XS via backwards compatibility. Wendell Redler in Hours of Darkness. So this seems like a pretty obvious entry, but you would be surprised how many people don't actually know this. The Far Cry 5 DLC, Hours of Darkness, at first glance seems very distant from the base game, as it takes place during the Vietnam War. However, it is still tied to Far Cry 5's story, as the character you play as in the DLC is a much younger Wendell Redler, the Vietnam veteran that gives you the quest What They Carried in the base game. Interestingly though, the dog tags you collect in the base game that are meant to be the dog tags of Wendell's squad in Vietnam don't actually have the names of the squad mates featured in the DLC: Yokel, Moses, Joker, and James Kenneth. Cut Far Cry 4 mission. The Far Cry 4 E3 demo is pretty interesting, because the mission in the demo isn't actually in the final game. The demo has Ajay destroying a convoy while trying to locate Ratu Gadi. After destroying the convoy, the pair locate Ratu Gadi and liberate it. Some people believe that this was a cut level in the game, and while it does look like that, in reality, it's more than likely that this mission was built exclusively for this demo, as Herc is being controlled by a second player, and at no point in Far Cry 4 are you required to play the game in co-op. The E3 demo also features unique landmarks that were removed from the final game, such as rice fields near Ratu Gadi. Stranger Things is canon. The Vanishing is a free story DLC for Far Cry 6 that crosses over the worlds of Stranger Things with Far Cry. Set during the events of the game, Danny discovers a secret Soviet research program called Locke Project buried beneath Yara. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the group continued their work in secret in Yara, testing on a woman named Shest, and using the keys machine to enter the Upside Down. Danny breaks into the Locke Project's base and takes out the group with the help of Shest. Danny then travels into the Upside Down to locate Chorizo, who's been captured by a Demogorgon. After rescuing the funny dog and killing a bunch of the flayed, Danny escapes the Upside Down, and Shest teleports Danny to safety as the bunker blows up. So this DLC officially confirms that Stranger Things and Far Cry take place in the same universe. At least, maybe it does. Most people don't actually consider this DLC canon, as it's pretty out there. However, as of right now, Season 5 of Stranger Things isn't out yet, there actually isn't anything in the Vanishing DLC that completely goes against Stranger Things' lore. At least I'm pretty sure it doesn't. So it's possible that this is actually canon. But probably not. You can kill Sabal and Amita. So if you've played Far Cry 4, you'll probably know that eventually you'll be given the choice to kill either Sabal or Amita. But this isn't the only time you can kill them. At the very end of the game, when it's revealed that Sabal and Amita are both pretty messed up, with Sabal leading Kiret into a religious extremist government, and Amita turning the country into a drug state with child soldiers, and is also implied to have killed Badra. After these revelations, you can actually kill them as they walk away. If you do this, Sabal or Amida will be permanently dead, and the Golden Path members on the island where you killed either of them will become permanently hostile. However, the Golden Path members across Kyrat are still friendly to you. Far Cry Multiplayer. So despite Far Cry being primarily a single-player experience, every mainline game, from the original to Far Cry 5, features some kind of multiplayer mode. First, there's the original Far Cry, which only had 3 game modes and 3 multiplayer classes: Grunt, Sniper, and Support. The game also featured 12 multiplayer maps, and the game's matches could hold up to 18 players. Sadly, Far Cry 1's multiplayer was shut down in October of 2015. As for Far Cry 2, its multiplayer had up to 16 players. It featured various game modes, like Team Deathmatch, Free-for-All, and Capture the Flag. The game also featured classes to play as, this time having a lot more classes, like Gunner that specializes in heavy weapons, Guerrilla that specializes in shotguns, and Saboteur that specializes in silenced weapons. Far Cry 2 featured 14 multiplayer maps at launch, but would receive DLC maps, 5 in total. Sadly, Far Cry 2's multiplayer would be shut down in June of 2021. Multiplayer would return in Far Cry 3, with 4 game modes and 10 multiplayer maps. However, this time things were different. Instead of playing as various classes, the game took inspiration from Call of Duty and had a Create a Class, allowing you to choose what weapons and skills you would take out into the battlefield. The game also introduced the Battle Cry system, which allowed players to buff other players. Sadly, the game's multiplayer was shut down in September of 2022. As for Far Cry 4, the game's multiplayer was changed up yet again. This time, weapons and abilities were exclusive to factions. For example, if you were playing as the Golden Path, you would be able to use guns, explosives, and vehicles. But if you played as the Rakshasa, you would use bow and arrows, and be given the ability to summon local wildlife to attack players, and be given the ability to teleport around the map. The game featured 3 multiplayer modes, with a 4th being added in via DLC, and 10 multiplayer maps at launch, with 4 maps being added in via DLC. And finally, there's Far Cry 5's multiplayer, which is the most different out of all of them. For starters, there's very few official maps, as most maps are actually user-created, and your weapon loadout is decided by which map you're playing on. Despite the large amount of player-created maps, the mode only has 2 game modes, Team Deathmatch and Free-for-All. Multiplayer was planned for Far Cry 6, but was scrapped for unknown reasons. Though many theorize that because Far Cry 6 was already being delayed by 8 months, the multiplayer was cut to avoid potentially delaying the game even further. But this is just speculation. Oh, and I didn't mention it before, but all of these games I just talked about also included map editors. Voss loves his sister. So in Far Cry 3, it's hinted that Voss loves his sister Citra. Like, really loves her. Like, really, really loves her. Like they bang. But this is just hinted at in Far Cry 3. It's never actually outright stated. But then in Far Cry 6's Insanity DLC, it's just flat out confirmed that they were banging. And yeah, that's all the entry is. Voss and Citra do be pretty crazy. Far Cry 1 is non-canon. Far Cry 1 is probably the most unique Far Cry game out there, as it uses a completely different engine from the other mainline games, and has a very different type of story, being much more over the top than the other game's stories. For example, this game's story has a bunch of mutants. Because of this, it's often stated that Far Cry 1 isn't actually canon to the events of the rest of the series, or is an in-universe film, in the same way that Blood Dragon is an in-universe film. However, this has never been confirmed by Ubisoft, and there's actually more evidence that the game is canon than there is evidence that the game isn't canon. For instance, the game takes place in 2025, which is set after every single Far Cry game, except for New Dawn. But that game actually is non-canon. I'll talk about that in a bit. Oh, and I guess like when Far Cry 7 comes out, it'll probably take place in 2025, but Far Cry 7's not out yet, so ignore that for now. However, at the same time, in Far Cry 4, you can find a game book with the description that reads, "In this riveting choose-a-path adventure, your choices determine if Jack Carver successfully escapes the deadly island of Dr. Krieger." You'd think this would confirm Far Cry 1 as an in-universe book. But there's actually one more piece of evidence that confirms Far Cry 1's canonicity. Just kidding, it actually makes everything so much more confusing, and I'll talk about it in its own entry, because it deserves its own entry. Primal is set in ancient Kyrat. So it's been theorized that Far Cry Primal takes place in ancient Kyrat. This is because Primal's map is actually built off of a heavily modified version of Far Cry 4's map, similar to how New Dawn uses a heavily modified Far Cry 5 map. So this must mean that Far Cry Primal takes place in ancient Kyrat. Right? Well, no. This was only done to save Ubisoft some time and resources. In actuality, Primal takes place in Oros, a fictional land in Europe, while Kyrat is a fictional country in Asia. Ubisoft Universe. So I'll go further into detail about this entry throughout the iceberg, but basically, this is a theory that most of Ubisoft's biggest franchises are set in the same universe. These being Assassin's Creed, Watch Dogs, Rainbow Six, Splinter Cell, Ghost Recon, and of course, Far Cry. People think this is true because of various Easter eggs in each of the game's franchises. Take, for instance, the Assassin's Creed franchise and the Watch Dogs series. In Watch Dogs 1, there's a quest that relates to the Assassin's Creed series, and in Watch Dogs Legion, there's straight up an entire Assassin's Creed crossover DLC. So those games at least have to be canon to each other. Right? Nope. Both the Watch Dogs 1 quest and Legion's crossover DLC have both been confirmed by Ubisoft to be non-canon. And because of this, I think it's very safe to say that any and all crossover Easter eggs or references made in these games are just Easter eggs and references. They're not confirming that all these games are canon to each other. So any Easter eggs I talk about in this video in regards to Assassin's Creed, Watch Dogs, Rainbow Six, etc. are not canon. But you can always just ignore Ubisoft and just headcanon them all together, so I guess they can be canon if you want them to be. Blood Dragon 2. Ubisoft likes money. Ubisoft also likes making games. And Ubisoft loves Blood Dragon. So, where's Blood Dragon 2? Yeah, this entry is about the non-existent sequel that should exist, as Blood Dragon is so beloved by players that it even received a standalone remaster in December of 2021. And it's not like Ubisoft doesn't know people want a Blood Dragon 2. After all, they keep teasing it. In Far Cry 5, there's a mission called Blood Dragon 3, revealing the events of Blood Dragon to be an in-universe movie. And this quest also reveals that Blood Dragon 2 was made in-universe. So why hasn't Ubisoft actually done it? Well, it's because they don't want to. Or at the very least, they didn't want to in 2014. Yes, in November of 2014, Ubisoft Montreal revealed that they didn't have any interest in making a sequel to Blood Dragon. So will we ever see Blood Dragon 2? Maybe. I don't know. Bigfoot. So Far Cry has a bit of an obsession with Yetis. And who can blame them? Yetis are cool. Although, do they really need to be in the Mars DLC and the Zombies DLC? But despite their love for Yetis, the standard Bigfoot has yet to make an appearance in Far Cry. At least a physical appearance. In Far Cry 5, if you head over to the Dansky cabin and activate the side quest, Gone Squatchin', you'll be asked to track down a lost Bigfoot hunter. During this little quest, you'll find a note mentioning how the Bigfoot hunter believes he's heard a Bigfoot. And right after you read the note, you'll hear the Bigfoot hunter being killed by a Bigfoot. You'll eventually find his body and his cabin keycard in Bigfoot's now abandoned cave. Using this keycard, you can then enter his cabin and take some loot. But it's not just loot in his cabin. You'll also find a map revealing several locations where Bigfoot has been spotted in Hope County. However, these aren't actual sightings, meaning that if you go to these locations on the map, you're not going to find any Bigfoot there. Why doesn't the US government care about Joseph Seed? So this is a question that many fans had while playing Far Cry 5. Now we know why the Hope County Sheriff's Department never sent reinforcements to help stop Joseph Seed, as it was infiltrated by Eden's Gate. But what about the US government? Where's the National Guard at? I mean, these guys are straight up taking over an entire part of Montana. Surely the US government has to at least know something's going on. So why aren't they doing anything about it? Well, there's three explanations. The first is, thanks to radios on the map, we know that the United States is kinda, sorta about to engage in a nuclear war during the events of Far Cry 5. So they're probably not super concerned right now about a cult taking over a part of Montana. In fact, Willis Huntley pretty much says this in-game. The second explanation is that Eden's Gate had cell jammers blocking out internet access from the people of Hope County, so they couldn't exactly call anyone and let them know what's going on. And finally, prior to the events of Far Cry 5, Eden's Gate was more on the down low. They were still trying to pretend they were peaceful. So if anyone were to get information out about Eden's Gate, whoever they got in contact with probably wouldn't believe them at first, so they would contact the county's police department. And since they're compromised, they would just tell them that everything's fine. Far Cry New Dawn is non-canon. So when Far Cry New Dawn was announced, everyone was confused, as New Dawn takes place in a post-apocalyptic world in 2035. It serves as a continuation of the Resist ending to Far Cry 5. The ending that everyone assumed was non-canon, because, you know, the nuclear war. Because of this, many fans assumed that Far Cry 6 would be a reboot and take place in a new timeline. But they were wrong, as Far Cry 6 is very clearly canon to Far Cry 3, 4, and 5, as there's pretty direct connections to those games in Far Cry 6. So this means that New Dawn is basically a what-if story. The actual canon ending to Far Cry 5 is either the secret ending or the walk-away ending. Honestly, I'm fine with New Dawn being non-canon, because I'm not exactly a big fan of Joseph Seed having a Diet Kylo Ren son who turns into a demon yeti. Inside Eden's Gate. Released in March of 2018, Inside Eden's Gate is a 30-minute long short film released by Ubisoft meant to promote Far Cry 5. The short basically serves as a prequel to the game, as if you remember in Far Cry 5, the deputy and friends only go to arrest Joseph after some videos got leaked to the internet showing that he's pretty crazy.
This does not even deserve a captain's log introduction, because this is dead serious. The inside and outside tour I did a few months ago of my house, everyone here, my mother and my father are angry at me, are blaming me. It's my fault. I admit it's my fault. I want everything about my house off the internet. I'll send in detectives. I'll send in police. I'll send in everything in my power to get it off the internet.
Listen to me.
Yes.
Listen to me.
Yes.
Shut that goddamn thing off. I don't care what you do. You get all that stuff off of there tonight.
I'm working on it.
Go work on it.
I am
Do
working.
you realize something? Let me tell you. If the health department of Greene County sees those videos that you put on the damn internet, they could condemn our house and we would have to move out of it.
I'm working on it. I was making a video for you to tell everybody to get the images off of the internet. It's out my control.
No, you get them off.
It's out my control. I don't know where to go. I don't know where to
You
go.
loaded them up there, you unload them.
I'm working on it. So yeah, please get everything off of the internet now, 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 now! Curse the trolls. Peace to everybody else.
This short film tells the story about how that footage was filmed and put online, and by extension, also tells the story about how those vloggers died. Unfortunately, while characters from the game, like John, Jacob, Faith, Nick Rye, and Mary May Fairgrave, appear in the film, they're not played by their voice actors. However, Greg Brick does reprise his role of Joseph Seed, which is pretty awesome. And that's all I'm going to say about this short film, as it's freely available on YouTube, so you can watch it right after this video.
Can anybody hear me? My name's Jack Carver. I'm on this island. It's crawling with mercenaries. They caught me. They did something to me. It's changing me. I can feel it. But I escaped. So now they're hunting me. They think I'm an animal. Maybe they're right.
Far Cry Instincts. In stores now.
Far Cry 6 Game of the Year Edition. So regardless of how you feel about Far Cry 6, the game was nominated for a bunch of awards, but lost all of them. But that didn't stop Ubisoft from taking a victory lap as they released Far Cry 6 Game of the Year Edition in 2022. Now this isn't anything that new. For example, Fallout 4 had a Game of the Year Edition even though it lost to The Witcher 3 in 2015. Difference is, though, Fallout 4 did win Game of the Year in the 12th British Academy Games Awards, and the 19th Annual DICE Awards. So technically, it won 2 Game of the Year awards. Just not the one that most people care about. Far Cry 6 didn't win any Game of the Year awards. Period. So yeah, Far Cry 6 Game of the Year Edition is just kinda weird. Task Force 141. In Far Cry 3, Willis Huntley mentions that he's joining Task Force 141 for a mission in Russia. Task Force 141 is then mentioned again in Far Cry 4, where in Huntley's bio, it's mentioned that he's in Kyrat after doing a mission with Task Force 141. This is an obvious reference to Task Force 141 from the original Modern Warfare trilogy, and I guess by extension now, the reboot Modern Warfare trilogy. Alaskan Extraction Shooter. In October of 2023, a leak was, well, leaked to the internet, that 2 Far Cry games were in development. Far Cry 7 and a standalone multiplayer game codenamed Project Maverick. Project Maverick is supposedly an extraction shooter set in the Alaskan wilderness. Well, kinda the Alaskan wilderness. For some reason, Alaska will be known as Alashnica in the game. The game will also feature a hideout system where you can stash your loot. You'll also be crafting a lot, building bullets, armor, gadgets, medical supplies, etc. The leak also stated that the game would be released around April of 2025. And that's currently all we know about it. That's if it's even real. And honestly, even if it does come out, seeing how Ghost Recon Frontline, Hyperscape, and that Watch Dogs Battle Royale game were treated by Ubisoft, it probably won't last very long. Animated series. In October of 2019, it was announced that Ubisoft was developing various animated shows based on their game franchises. One example was a Watch Dogs animated series based on a teenage hacker that solves crimes in high school. The show would also be aimed at tweens. Very weird choice to give the game series that had its first installment to deal with sex trafficking a show aimed at children, but whatever, I guess. Ubisoft also announced Captain Laserhawk, a Blood Dragon vibe, which would serve as an adult animated series that would not be an adaptation of Blood Dragon, or the Far Cry series as a whole. Yeah, despite being named after Blood Dragon, and the show's aesthetics clearly going for that Blood Dragon vibe, the show follows a bunch of OCs living in a world inspired by various Ubisoft franchises. Unlike the Watch Dogs show, this show would actually end up being made, releasing on Netflix in October of 2023, although it was renamed into Captain Laserhawk, a Blood Dragon remix. The show featured various Ubisoft characters, like Sam Fisher from Splinter Cell, Jade from Beyond Good and Evil, and Rayman from the Rayman series. Yes, that's Rayman eating sushi off of a Furbait character while high on cocaine. I feel so bad for Rayman fans, all they want is a new game. Anyways, there actually is a Far Cry character that appears in the show, Pagan Min. And no, he's not voiced by Troy Baker. In fact, none of the characters in this show are voiced by their normal voice actors. Kinda defeats the whole purpose of a big crossover project, but whatever, I guess. Although apparently this show is good, it got good reviews and it seems fans like it, so the hell do I know? I didn't watch it. The last thing I want to mention is that in the 2019 announcement, Ubisoft also announced that they were working on an animated sketch comedy series about video game culture. Oh boy, I sure hope it's not about video game work culture. Future Far Cry poll. In January of 2015, Ubisoft sent out a poll to Far Cry players regarding potential future Far Cry games. Players were asked to choose their 3 favorite options for a potential future Far Cry game. These options being a game set during the Vietnam War, a zombie apocalypse game, a Mad Max-style post-apocalyptic game, a Jurassic Park Dinosaur Island-style game, a game set in the drug-trafficking jungles of Peru, a game that continues the story of Shangri-La from Far Cry 4, a game where you'd either fight or become a vampire, a sci-fi game set on another world, a game about surviving the Alaskan wilderness, Blood Dragon 2, and finally, a Wild West game. Personally, I really want that Dinosaur Island game. Give it to me, please. Interestingly though, we might actually end up getting that dinosaur game, because in the years since this poll was sent out, we've seen several of these projects actually happen. The Vietnam War game became the Far Cry 5 DLC, Hours of Darkness. The Mad Max-style game became New Dawn. The zombie apocalypse game became the Far Cry 5 DLC, Dead Living Zombies. The sci-fi game became the Far Cry 5 DLC, Lost on Mars. And if that leak about the extraction shooter is true, then that's the Alaskan Wilderness game. So it's possible that all the other options on this poll will come out one day. Independence Day and the Thunder Gun. In Far Cry 5, there's a series of side missions that consists of Free Larry, The Hero's Journey, Close Encounters, and Out of This World. This questline features the deputy doing missions for a dude named Larry Parker. Larry is obsessed with aliens and believes that they're living on Mars and planning to invade Earth. This dude is actually a reference to the character Brackish Okun from the 1996 film Independence Day, and its 2016 sequel that nobody likes, Independence Day Resurgence. Anyways, Larry's a reference to this character because they both share extremely similar designs, and they're both obsessed with aliens. Also, after beating this questline, you'll be given the weapon the Magnopulsar, which is a weapon built by Larry Parker that fires microwave beams. Some people have claimed that this weapon is a reference to the Thunder Gun, a wonder weapon featured in Call of Duty Black Ops, Black Ops 3, and Black Ops 4 Zombies. But I don't think it is. Like, they look vaguely similar, but the Thunder Gun fires pressurized air, while the Magnopulsar fires magnetized microwaves. Yeah, they both send enemies flying, but that's pretty much their only similarity. Far Cry 4's super secret ending. Far Cry 4 actually has a second secret ending. After sparing Pagan Min during your final confrontation with him, he'll get into his helicopter and be flown away. And most players will just assume that this is the end of the story. However, if you have a rocket launcher with you, you can actually shoot down Pagan Min's helicopter, killing him in the process. And the most interesting thing is, this will actually create a new unmarked location for you to discover. If you travel back to Pagan's palace, you'll find his helicopter's crash site near the palace, with Pagan's corpse lying on the ground. You can then loot his body for his golden pen and his lapel pin, which together are worth 900,000 rupees. Splinter Cell. In Far Cry New Dawn, there's a mission in the game that connects the Splinter Cell franchise with the Far Cry franchise. During the expedition, Government Plane Wreck, you travel to Iowa to loot a crashed military plane. However, this isn't just any military plane. This is the Paladin from the Splinter Cell series. If you explore the wreckage, you can find various notes referencing characters from the Splinter Cell franchise, like Coben, Briggs, Cole, and Grimm. In fact, these notes are written by Sam Fisher himself, the protagonist of Splinter Cell. By interacting with a console, you can then find Sam Fisher's iconic outfit, and you can actually take it and wear it for the rest of the game. Primal was originally DLC. So this is a rumor that some Far Cry fans believe. The rumor being that Far Cry Primal was originally intended to be a 4th DLC for Far Cry 4. Or, I guess 5th DLC if you count the Herc missions. However, there's practically no evidence for this rumor. I believe this rumor came to be once it was discovered that Primal's map was a heavily modified version of Far Cry 4's map, and that was most likely done just to save time and resources. So, like I said, there's pretty much no evidence for this rumor, so it's more than likely not true. Primal was always going to be a standalone game. Far Cry Vengeance. Far Cry Vengeance is the 3rd installment in the Far Cry Instincts spin-off series. Although I guess Predator would count as the 3rd installment, but that's basically a glorified port, so I don't count it. Instead of Far Cry Vengeance being a sequel to Evolution, it's a remake of Evolution on the Wii. Released in December 2006, Vengeance serves as an expansion on Evolution's story, as the game features 3 new levels that expand the game's narrative. For example, the game has an entirely new prologue level. But other than these new levels, the game's single player is largely the same, just with motion controls and worse graphics. Oh, and you don't start the game with your Predator abilities like Evolution. You gotta earn them again. But to make up for the weaker visuals, the game also includes 3 new multiplayer maps and some new weapons. Yes, this game features multiplayer. However, it's only local multiplayer. There's no online option. Vengeance received very bad reviews, as the game struggled in the visual department, and it didn't exactly have the best enemy AI. And worst of all, the game's motion controls were very inconsistent. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. But I mean, it was an early third-party Wii game, so that's to be expected. And because of all this, Vengeance has become forgotten to time as the only Nintendo Far Cry game. Voss wasn't supposed to exist. Voss was originally a completely different character. This character was named Bull. He was a half-blind pirate with a nose ring, a very standard brute henchman type character. Which makes sense, as Bull was intended to be the secondary antagonist, not the main one. However, after Michael Mando auditioned for the role, the character was scrapped entirely, and in his place, Voss was created. Just kidding, Pyro was created. Yeah, Michael Mando was originally going to be playing a villain named Pyro, who was a pirate with half of his body covered in burns, much like Two-Face or Hanako from Katawa Shoujo. Pyro would have a love for fire, and would be extremely aggressive. However, during development, Pyro's name was changed to Voss, and his personality was altered to remove the fire obsession aspects of his character, with it being replaced with Voss's now iconic mental games. Firewatch. In Far Cry 5, if you go to the Johnson Lookout Tower on Dutch's Island, you can find a telephone. Interacting with the telephone will play a voicemail from a woman trying to contact a man named Henry. She's trying to alert him about some cult members in the area, when she's suddenly attacked and presumably killed by the cult.
Hey, Henry. I'm at the edge of the wood near where you spotted the fire sign. I don't know what that showboater was doing buzzing the treetops, but the sky is now clear of air traffic. That smoke plume is pretty thick, but I need a closer look. What I can't figure out is what all these Peggies are doing out here. There's a whole bunch of them in the woods, calling out like they're looking for someone. I don't know if they're involved, but they seem pretty crusty and... Holy hell! A pickup just drove by like nobody's business, and the Peggies in the back were all carrying rifles and shotguns. I'm gonna... Holy sh...
This voicemail is actually a reference to the video game Firewatch. As in that game, you play as a man named Henry, who talks with a woman via a walkie-talkie, and the most iconic location in the game is a fire lookout. Hidden tech demo level. In Far Cry 1, if you access the game's console commands and type in /mapdemo, you'll be sent to a secret level. However, it's not really a full-on level. Instead, it's a tech demo for the game's developers to test various things, like the game's physics, vehicles, guns, enemies, etc. It's actually a fairly large area, so you can explore it for quite a while before running out of things to do. Although, at the same time, there's not really a ton to do in this little test level. But hey, a secret level's a secret level. Predecessor missions. These are a series of 7 different bonus missions in Far Cry 2. You might not know about them because originally, the only way to gain access to these missions was to pre-order Far Cry 2 from GameStop. If you did, you'd be given codes to input in the bonus content screen on the main menu, unlocking these missions. But thankfully, these codes weren't unique, and have since been uploaded to the internet. Anyways, these missions have the player investigating the Predecessor, a mercenary who was sent in to kill the Jackal. But because he failed, the player was sent in to take over the job. These missions also give the player 2 different skins for the machete, primitive and homemade. Assassin's Creed. There's been multiple different Easter eggs relating to the Assassin's Creed franchise in Far Cry. Some of these include, in Far Cry 3, during the mission Ignition in the Deep, you can find logos scattered around the compound you're in. These logos are of the company Abstergo from Assassin's Creed. You'll then eventually find a letter mentioning lore from the Assassin's Creed franchise, like the Pieces of Eden. In Far Cry Primal, you can find a giant assassin insignia drawn in the dirt, implying that the Assassin's Order goes all the way back to caveman times. In Far Cry 5, you can find a note during the mission Patriot Acts from an assassin named Galina Voronina, a character from Assassin's Creed Syndicate. In Far Cry 6, you can find a pile of hay next to a stone tower with a diving board. This is an obvious reference to the Leap of Faith done in the Assassin's Creed games. The Leap of Faith eagle cry can even be heard when you're standing on the board. You can also find a note mentioning that a pair of hidden blades and the Spear of Leonidas from Assassin's Creed Odyssey are being sold at an auction. And finally, in Assassin's Creed Rogue, you can find a magazine featuring Far Cry 3 on the cover, although for some reason it's labeled as Far Cry 5. Secret Blood Dragons. In Far Cry Primal, in the northeastern part of the map, you can find a cave at the end of a large river. If you travel inside the cave, you'll eventually discover the skeletal remains of a blood dragon from Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon. The skeleton is also surrounded by various blood dragon eggs, and discovering this skeleton will earn you an achievement. But this isn't the only blood dragon skeleton you can find in the series. In the Far Cry 5 DLC, Lost on Mars, you can find 2 blood dragon skeletons while completing the quest Body Parts in the Pits of Peril. Far Cry 3 Co-op. Starting in Far Cry 4, you can play every Far Cry campaign, minus some of the DLC and Primal, in co-op with one of your friends. However, this wasn't the first time Far Cry had co-op. That would be Far Cry 3, where co-op was its own dedicated mode with its own campaign. Far Cry 3's co-op mode is a 4-player campaign that serves as a prequel to the base game. The story follows 4 characters, Callum, Leonard, Mikhail, and Tisha, as they battle pirates in the Rook Islands, after being scammed out of their money by pirates in the area. The campaign runs for 8 missions. 6 were released at launch, but 2 were added in via DLC. While this mode sounds really cool on paper, the mode had some issues. For starters, the only ways to play it are in private matches or in public lobbies. And if you search for a public lobby, you're at the mercy of whoever is hosting the match, as they're the ones who control what level you're playing on and what difficulty you're on. But to counter that, your account and weapon XP carry over from co-op to multiplayer, and vice versa, which was really cool when the game came out. But the game's multiplayer has been shut down, so it's not really that cool anymore. Overall, Far Cry 3's co-op is a flawed but unique Far Cry experience that you can only play in the original Far Cry 3. Yeah, for some reason they didn't bring this back with the Classic Edition. Guy Buried in the Sand. In Far Cry 3, if you travel to this part of the map, you'll find a dead person buried up to his neck in sand. If you interact with the head, you'll be given the achievement, Say Hi to the Internet. This is a reference to not only the cover of Far Cry 3, but also the Far Cry 3 promotional web series, The Far Cry Experience, which I'll talk about a bit later. This Easter egg would return in Far Cry 6, as if you travel to the beach near Corsario's cache, you'll stumble upon something. What is that something? Well, it's up to the game. Similar to the random encounters in the Fallout series, when you return to this area, the beach will have a different event, ranging from 2 rebels digging a grave, a dead horse lying on the beach, a soldier arresting somebody, or a reference to Far Cry 3. This Easter egg has you stumble upon a bucket in the sand, with a bunch of crabs crawling around it. If you shoot the bucket, it'll fall down the little sandhill it's on, and reveal a dead person who's buried up to his neck. Far Cry 5's ending is a dream. Some Far Cry fans are convinced that the endings of Far Cry 5 are a dream. Now, I hate dream theories as much as the next guy, but what's the evidence? Well, first, there's the nuke ending. People think this is a dream because, well, there's a nuclear war. How could a nuclear war happen at the end of Far Cry 5 if Far Cry 6 exists? Well, this can be countered by saying that the nuke ending just wasn't the canon ending. Then there's the fact that Joseph sprays you with the bliss prior to his boss fight, and everyone around you is hit by the bliss as well. So the idea is that the nuclear war was just a collective hallucination. Problem is, New Dawn is a sequel to this ending, so it can't be a dream or hallucination. But what about the walk away ending? Well, some people believe that's a dream because of all the bliss you fought through over the course of the game. Although, in all honesty, this is really weak evidence. No offense if you believe in the dream theories, but it's pretty obvious that Far Cry 5's endings are not dreams. Rambo 4 and 5 don't exist in Far Cry. In the Far Cry 6 DLC mission, All the Blood, aka the kinda Rambo crossover, Danny helps the character Silvio Morello. Silvio claims that he is the biggest Rambo fan in the entire world. And he probably is. And in his hideout, you can see posters and merch of various Rambo films. The first 3 ones, to be exact. For some reason, posters for Rambo 4, aka Rambo 2008, aka John Rambo, and Rambo Last Blood aren't present. This is very strange, because Far Cry 6 takes place in 2021, so both of these films should be out. And because Silvio is a superfan, he should have at least a few posters or merch for the last 2 Rambo films. Or at the very least to mention them. But he doesn't. He just keeps referencing the original 3 films. I'm undeniably overthinking it, but because of this, it's possible that in the world of Far Cry, the 4th and 5th Rambo films were never made. Now you might think, oh well, maybe they weren't mentioned because the writer of the DLC just didn't like those films. And sure, that's entirely possible, but you'd think if that was true, there would be a line about how Danny, or even Silvio, dislikes the later films. Like, Silvio can be like, I love all the Rambo films. And Danny's just like, even the last 2? And Silvio could respond with, I love most of the Rambo films. I don't know. Kind of a silly entry, but I thought it was kind of interesting. Say Yes sign message. In Far Cry 5, if you head over to the giant yes sign and decide to take a peek behind the sign, you'll see that somebody graffitied, "The Father Stinks." It's a pretty funny Easter egg, until you realize that whoever did this was probably executed. Cancelled PlayStation 2 and GameCube Instincts port. The Far Cry Instincts series is exclusive to Xbox consoles, except for the Wii game and the last game in the series that I'll talk about a bit later. But it wasn't originally going to be an exclusive. Instincts was originally planned to be released on the original Xbox, the PlayStation 2, and the Nintendo GameCube. But for whatever reason, these ports were cancelled. Boomer is dead in New Dawn. I hope that this isn't a shock to most of you, but Boomer the dog, featured in Far Cry 5 and Far Cry 6, is long dead in Far Cry New Dawn. However, Boomer does have a presence in the game, and by presence, I mean you can find his grave. You can find Boomer's grave in New Fang Center, in a church's catacombs. Interestingly though, while developing New Dawn, developers debated on having a descendant of Boomer as a companion in the game. However, the team eventually decided against this idea and created a new dog, named Timber. Far Cry 5 Resistance Edition. In April of 2017, it was announced that Far Cry 5 would be receiving a special edition in collaboration with Triforce, this being Far Cry 5 Resistance Edition. This edition of the game would come with a steelbook, the game's season pass, postcards, a Hope County bandana and pin, a Hope County mug, and a statue featuring Nick Rye and Boomer. Seems like a pretty neat special edition, right? Well, too bad it was never released. In January of 2018, it was announced that this edition of the game was cancelled by the manufacturer. Cancelled Far Cry film. In June 2013, it was announced by Ubisoft that they would be entering the film industry with 6 films based on their biggest franchises: Watch Dogs, Splinter Cell, Ghost Recon, Rabbids, Assassin's Creed, and Far Cry. Well, I say biggest franchises, but when they made this announcement, Watch Dogs 1 wasn't even out yet, so... God, Ubisoft is such a weird company. Anyways, that's it. No, really, that's it. There was no writer, no director, no release date, nothing. Nothing was ever announced for the Far Cry movie, outside of it being based on Far Cry and that it would be live action. Funny enough, out of all the projects revealed in that announcement, the only film that actually happened was the Assassin's Creed film, which, didn't exactly do well. While the Far Cry film hasn't technically been cancelled, it's safe to assume that 11 years of no development means that the project is very much dead. But don't worry, if you want a live-action Far Cry film, one exists. And it's awful. Uwe Boll's Far Cry. Released in October of 2008, exclusively in Germany, and directed by Uwe Boll, Far Cry is a film based on the first game in the Far Cry series, with actor Till Schweiger playing Jack Carver. And while the film is based on the original game, the film's plot isn't a one-to-one adaptation. For example, Jack ends up entering a relationship with Valerie. Also, Valerie's last name is Cardinal, so I can't tell if she was meant to be an adaptation of Valerie Constantine from Far Cry 1 or Valerie Cortez from Instincts. The film also features various new characters, like Katia Chernov, who serves as Krieger's second-in-command. Probably one of the most interesting things about the film is that Stuttering Craig and Handsome Tom from ScrewAttack.com have cameos in the film. Or were supposed to. They had asked Uwe Boll if they could have a cameo in the film, and he basically responded with, "Sure, if you guys come up to Vancouver." So the pair did, and had their scenes filmed. Handsome Tom was a soldier, and Stuttering Craig was a scientist. And not only did they get to be in the film, but they had also recorded an interview with Uwe Boll. But their scenes got cut, and they weren't even included in the film's credits. Anyways, the film was released in theaters exclusively in Germany, and released straight to DVD for the rest of the world. So was this film good? No. It received a ton of negative reviews, with critics and fans alike critiquing the script, the effects, and the censorship. Yes, the film was actually censored in Germany, the only country it was released theatrically in. However, despite its negative reception, it's got kind of an ironic following, with people claiming that the film is so bad it's good. Last thing I'll mention is that this film actually was referenced in Far Cry 5, as Guy Marvel states that Blood Dragon 3 will be much better than the Far Cry movie. Nuke in Far Cry 4. Just north of the Shanath training ground in Far Cry 4, you can stumble upon a tiny little house. At first glance, it doesn't really seem like this house is all that special. However, if you head over to the backyard, you'll find an open bunker. If you enter the bunker, you'll be met with a few things, like a shotgun, a med kit, an assault rifle, and a nuclear bomb. Yeah, for some reason, whoever owns this house has a nuclear bomb in their backyard. However, this isn't the only nuclear bomb in Kyrat. More on that in a little bit. Ripping Grinder. Originally, Sloan, the main antagonist of Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, was going to have a pair of undead mercenaries working under him, named Rip and Grinder. The pair were originally intended to be the boss fight during the mission Summon the Plague. However, they were replaced with a fight against a horde of cyber zombies. This mission is actually named after Rip and Grinder, as the pair would refer to themselves as the Plague. You can still find various audio lines in the game's files that relate to Rip and Grinder, suggesting that they were removed fairly late during development. Mortal Kombat Roosters. In Far Cry 6, you can play a minigame that has you playing as roosters battling other roosters. I don't think YouTube would like it if I actually said what this was called, so we'll just call it Rooster Roughhousing. While exploring the world of Far Cry 6, you can discover two roosters, named Toasty and Frosty. Toasty's description mentions that he's got a hellfire-like rage and wishes for his opponents to get near him, while Frosty is the Grand Master of a secret rooster clan. By discovering these roosters, you could unlock them in Rooster Roughhousing. These guys are very obvious references to Scorpion and Sub-Zero from the Mortal Kombat franchise. Off topic, but wouldn't Voss be a really cool guest fighter from Mortal Kombat? Novels. Like many video game franchises, the Far Cry series has expanded to other media, like novels. However, unless you speak German, you probably won't get much out of these novels. Out of the 3 novels released for the franchise, 2 of them are in German. The first novel is Far Cry Götterdämmerung, which was released in 2007 and written by Michael T. Batty. The novel is simply an adaptation of the first Far Cry game, although, due to it being a novel, it also expands upon the story. Batty would return in 2008 to write the second German novel, Far Cry 2 Bloody Diamonds. This novel serves as a prequel to Far Cry 2, and for a decade, these were the only 2 novels ever released for Far Cry. That was until Urban Waite was hired to write the novel Far Cry Absolution, released in February of 2018. This novel serves as a prequel to Far Cry 5 and mainly follows the characters Mary May Fairgrave and a novel original character, Will Boyd, and as of right now, these are the only Far Cry novels in existence. Mannequin Ghost Town. In Far Cry 5, if you travel to the town of Prosperity, you'll discover that the town is pretty much abandoned. However, it's not entirely empty, as the town is filled with mannequins posed in everyday activities. There's a ton of them scattered around the town, and nobody knows who set these mannequins up. Except we do. Yeah, I don't really know why so many people don't actually know this, but it's pretty obvious that these mannequins were set up by the character Tweak, who lives in Prosperity. It's still a slightly unnerving location, but once you realize that this dude set them all up, it kinda loses a lot of the creep factor. I doubt it, but this location may be a reference to Nagaro. This is a village in Japan that's filled with life-size realistic dolls positioned to resemble people going about their daily lives. This was done by Tsukimi Ayano, who did this to pay tribute to the former residents of the town. X-Defiant. X-Defiant is a free-to-play first-person shooter that's set to be released in May of 2024. Only a few days after this video's release. The game is notable in that it serves as a kinda official crossover between 5 Ubisoft franchises: Ghost Recon, Splinter Cell, Watch Dogs, The Division, and Far Cry, as X-Defiant has you playing as factions from these games. For example, DedSec from Watch Dogs, Echelon from Splinter Cell, The Cleaners from The Division, and Libertad from Far Cry. Each faction has their own abilities, and Libertad's abilities include some health boosts, health boosts, health boosts, and health boosts. Yeah, they're pretty much focused on health boosts. This is because each faction is focused on a different gameplay mechanic. Libertad focuses on healing, Cleaners focus on damage output, Echelon focuses on stealth, etc. So now you're probably wondering if X-Defiant is canon. No. For starters, why would Libertad leave Yara to go fight DeadSec and other factions way out of their league? And more importantly, the Division literally can't be set to the same universe as any of these games, as that game series is about the aftermath of the Green Poison, a pandemic that has spread worldwide and collapsed various governments, including the United States. Indiana Jones. Because of how popular and influential the Indiana Jones franchise is, the Far Cry series has paid tribute to it in several different games. In Far Cry 3, if you travel to this location on the map, you'll stumble upon an underground temple with treasure you can loot. The actual underground temple is designed after the Well of Souls from Raiders of the Lost Ark, complete with a bunch of snakes chilling out to the temple. In Far Cry 4, if you head over to the cave Yalung's Jaw, you'll discover various golden chalices and cups, and nearby, you can find the skeletal remains of an explorer holding a golden chalice. This is an obvious reference to the ending of The Last Crusade. In Far Cry New Dawn, by traveling to this part of the map, you can find the skeletal remains of somebody who tried to survive the nukes in a refrigerator. And whoever this person was, they were wearing a fedora when they died. This is an obvious reference to the nuking the fridge scene in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And finally, in Far Cry 6, the side quest, the Emerald Skull, is a direct reference to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, as you follow Dr. Halfbane's trail, an obvious nod to Dr. Jones. Bliss-scented air fresheners. While not as weird as infamous Second Son's condom pre-order bonus, for select editions of Far Cry 5, you could receive an air freshener meant to smell like the Bliss from Far Cry 5. Kind of a crazy idea to sell an air freshener based on a highly addictive drug used by a fictional Christian militant cult, but hey, what do I know? As to what editions it came with, from my research it seems to have come with the Hope County Collector's Edition. However, not every video or blog reviewing or unboxing this edition has the air freshener. The few I've found that included them were the German versions of the Hope County edition. So maybe it was a German exclusive pre-order. If anyone has an answer to this, please let me know in the comments below. Last thing that I'll mention is that according to people who got the air freshener, Bliss smells like lemon with a hint of vanilla. The Jackal is Jack Carver. So this is easily the biggest Far Cry theory out there, that the main villain of Far Cry 2, the Jackal, is actually Far Cry 1 protagonist Jack Carver. This was believed because the two characters look extremely similar, to the point where the Jackal's texture files all feature the name Jack Carver. And both Jack Carver and the Jackal were former members of the United States military. For over a decade, this was just a theory. But then, in October of 2021, Far Cry 2's creative director, Clint Hocking, confirmed that Jack Carver and the Jackal are the same character, saying, quote, "The Jackal is actually supposed to be Jack Carver from the original Far Cry. Jack Carver in the original Far Cry was this shifty smuggler gunrunner kind of crook. The idea was, the Jackal is just him 10 years later or something, after he's seen whatever he saw on the island in Far Cry. So, case closed. Jack Carver is the Jackal, which also means that Far Cry 1 has to be canon. But there's one problem. Far Cry 2 takes place in 2008. So how can Jack Carver become the Jackal, when in reality it was the Jackal who became Jack Carver? Especially since the Jackal looks much older than Jack Carver. So how is this possible? Well, it's pretty simple. The answer is that Far Cry 1 actually takes place prior to Far Cry 2. But you're probably wondering, how is that possible? Far Cry 1 takes place in 2025. Well, that's not entirely true. You can find on various websites, forum posts, and YouTube and Reddit comments mentioning that the game takes place in 2025. However, there's never actually been a source to these claims. I have no idea where this year comes from. So yeah, it's actually pretty simple. Far Cry 1 is canon, and takes place prior to Far Cry 2. Probably. Far Cry 6 Ghost. If you travel to the Santo Amaro Cemetery in Far Cry 6, you'll find a note talking about a spirit known as the Ghost of the Broken Father. If you're reading the note during the day, if you turn around right after reading the note, you might notice a quick flash of blue disappear in front of you. However, if you read the note at night, the Ghost of the Broken Father will fully appear in front of you and point you in the direction of a grave. Upon approaching the grave, you'll see the ghost crying with blue flames all around the grave. He and the fire will then disappear as you get closer. There'll be a note on the grave, and if you read it, you'll discover that the Ghost of the Broken Father was crying over the grave of his son. If you then travel to Casa Dario, you'll discover the aftermath of some kind of sacrifice. If you then head over to the nearby well, you'll discover a note where it's revealed that in his grief, the man murdered a woman because he was jealous of her happiness. And sure enough, if you descend into the well, you'll once again find the Ghost of the Broken Father recreating what he did to that woman at the bottom of the well. Comics. Like with various game franchises, Far Cry has expanded into the world of comics. First, there's Far Cry Rite of Passage, written by Brian Edward Hill, and released from May of 2021 to August of the same year. Published by Dark Horse Comics, this is an anthology series that lasts 3 issues, with each issue focusing on a different Far Cry villain. The story centers around Diego being told stories by Castillo about the villains of the prior games. Yeah, Castillo somehow knows about Voss, Pagan Min, and Joseph Seed. He tells Diego these stories as cautionary tales and lessons in leadership. The first story focuses on how Voss became addicted to drugs. The second tells the story about how Pagan Min discovered Kiret. And the final story focuses on how Joseph began to receive supposed visions of the future, and how he founded Eden's Gate. The second, and as of right now, final Far Cry comic, is Far Cry Esperanza's Tears. Published by Ablaze Comics, this comic was written by Matthew Mariel, and was released from October of 2022 to January of 2023. This series lasted 4 issues, and serves as a prequel to Far Cry 6 that focuses on Juan Cortez's origins, where he gets involved in a conflict in the fictional South American country of Santa Costa. Vincent Salas's original role. Vincent Salas is an extremely minor character in Far Cry 3. In fact, he's so minor that he only appears briefly in flashback scenes. He's one of Jason Brody's friends, who ends up being captured by Voss and his merry gang of pirates. However, unlike Jason's other friends, Vincent never shows up in scenes set in the present. But he was originally supposed to. In fact, prior to Far Cry 3's release, Ubisoft released a gameplay video featuring an early version of the mission The Medusa's Call, previously called The Medusa's Mast. And in this version of the mission, Willis mentions Vincent by name. It was later revealed by Far Cry 3's lead writer, Jeffrey Yohalem, that Vincent was originally going to be present in various important scenes in the game, and was going to accidentally be killed by Jason during a fight with Voss. And it's actually this role that was Vincent's undoing, as Far Cry 3's developers had a tough time figuring out how they were going to integrate him into the fight with Voss, so it was decided to just cut the character entirely. Castaway. In Far Cry 6, if you travel to the beaches near La Crema Lagoon, you'll discover a group of prisoners who escaped captivity planning something on the beach. If you return to this location, you'll discover that they've begun to build a raft. If you continue to return to this location, you'll see them continue to progress until eventually the raft is completed. However, by then only a single prisoner is alive, and next to him is a basketball in a tire. This is a reference to the film Castaway, as this basketball is very clearly a nod to the volleyball Wilson from the film. Far Cry 2 Mobile. Released in December of 2008, Far Cry 2 Mobile is exactly what it sounds like, a mobile version of Far Cry 2 released on phones. Developed by Gameloft, the game is extremely different from its console counterpart, as instead of it being a first-person shooter, the game is a top-down shooter, with a heavy emphasis placed on taking cover. The game allows you to play as one of 3 characters from Far Cry 2, Marty, Joseph, and Andre, and the game loosely follows the console game's story, as you travel around Africa tracking down the Jackal. And of course, using machetes, assault rifles, pistols, flamethrowers, rocket launchers, and sniper rifles to battle various enemies and commit various war crimes. But it's not just normal enemies you gotta worry about. Malaria is still in the game, and there's sections of the game where you have to go through minefields. The game isn't just normal levels though. There's a few hub areas you can explore and talk to people in. You can also buy malaria medicine and ammo in these hub areas. Also, the game features an unlockable character, Protector Robot. He's a robot who thinks that he's a mercenary and somehow can get malaria. Kinda wish this dude was in the console version of the game, because that would be a really funny, weird Easter egg in an overall extremely depressing game. It would be like if in Spec Ops The Line, there was an Easter egg where an Argorian would show up. Anyways, the game received very little attention when it was released. In fact, I was only able to find a single review of the game in 2008 by IGN. Overall, Far Cry 2 Mobile is a really interesting little oddity, and is probably the second most obscure Far Cry game out there. I'll talk about the most obscure Far Cry game in just a little bit. Far Cry 3 Jellyfish. So you might have thought you've unlocked every single entry in Far Cry 3's survival guide. However, you probably haven't, as the final entry is only unlockable by killing a jellyfish, something that you can't actually do without doing a glitch. If you drive out in a boat to the coordinates X 301.6, Y 283.3, your boat will suddenly fall through the ocean, and you'll be stuck in this weird limbo. It's here that you can find a jellyfish just chilling out. If you throw a Molotov at it, it'll kill the jellyfish, giving you the entry. And its entry is really weird. It reads, "The screams through the night, the hot air of explosions shaking the treetops. The bodies, some faceless. They were only following orders." This is similar to another weird survival guide entry, The Seagull. Their entry reads, "Every night I watch the skies from inside my bunker. They'll come back. If I watch, they'll come. I can hear their voices from the sky, calling out my name. There's the ridge, the guns in the jungle, screaming, smoke, the blood, all over my hands." It's unknown what these entries are referring to, as they're clearly not related to seagulls and jellyfish. Some believe that these entries are referencing Imperial Japanese holdouts, soldiers of Imperial Japan that continued to fight in World War II despite it being over. Hannelore Schmatz. Hannelore Schmatz was a climber born in February of 1940 in Germany. She was the fourth woman to ever summit Mount Everest. However, during her return from the summit, she passed away due to exhaustion and hypothermia. This was in October of 1979. For years, her frozen body remained on Mount Everest, and because of this, there's photos of her frozen body. Obviously, I'm not going to show you these photos, but you can easily find the photos online. Anyways, during the Far Cry 4 mission, Don't Look Down, you can find a frozen body lying near a rock. This frozen body is in the exact same pose as Hannelore Schmatz's body. Like, the exact same. It's not a coincidence. It's very obvious that this body was designed after photos of her frozen body. The Far Cry Experience. The Far Cry Experience is a web series uploaded to YouTube as part of a viral marketing campaign for Far Cry 3. The series follows Michael Mando playing Voss, torturing actor Christopher Mintz-Plasse. And that's kind of it. It's a dark comedy web series about Voss just, doing his usual Voss thing. He buries Chris up to his neck in sand, pees on him, rips out one of his teeth, feeds him one of his friends, and, does some other wacky zany things. The series lasted for 4 episodes, but despite its short length, the series is still referenced in Far Cry games. At only 30 minutes in length, the series is a must-watch for fans of the franchise, as it's basically just bonus Voss footage. Removed Motherland Bundle. When Far Cry 6 was released in October of 2021, one of the game's microtransaction bundles was called the Motherland Bundle. This bundle contained various Soviet Union-themed equipment, from a full-on Soviet soldier uniform, a Soviet-themed sniper rifle called the Eastern Front, a Soviet skin for a tank, and even an epic Soviet Union wristwatch. This was in the game for quite a while, until around March of 2022, when Ubisoft removed the bundle from the game. While it's never been officially confirmed, it is widely believed that this was in response to the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. Luckily, if you already purchased the bundle, you can still use these skins and weapons, but it doesn't seem like they'll ever be added back into the game's store. Valley of the Yetis is canon. So at first glance, you might assume that the Far Cry 4 DLC, Valley of the Yetis, is non-canon. After all, it involves Ajay battling Yetis, and by the end of the DLC, he turns into a Yeti. However, it's hinted at the end of the DLC that he didn't actually turn into a Yeti, and that this was simply just him hallucinating because of the relic. This is because he wakes up and is told that he was rescued from the Himalayas by the Golden Path. Also, this DLC is actually a direct sequel to the previous story DLC, Escape from Durgesh Prison, as the character Sukhwinder reappears. And the Escape from Durgesh Prison DLC is very obviously canon. So it's very possible that after escaping Durgesh, Ajay crash-landed in the Himalayas and battled a bunch of Yetis. Or it's a non-canon DLC that's meant to be dumb fun. Probably the latter, but it's very notable that the DLC does actually work within Far Cry 4's story. Far Cry Zeta. Far Cry Zeta is a cancelled Far Cry game that was being worked on in 2016 and 2017. Very little information is known about the game due to it never being officially announced. All we have is concept art that was uploaded to Xu Zhang's ArtStation account. Pretty much nothing is known about the game outside of it being clearly set in post-apocalyptic America. This has led some to believe that Far Cry Zeta was simply just a very early version of Far Cry New Dawn, which might be true. From the concept art, we can see that the game was going to have toxic plant life along with the ability to create complex traps to use against enemies. There were also going to be sections of the map that were completely flooded and would be home to various sharks. Also, in case you're wondering, it's very likely that Far Cry Zeta was simply just a working title. The exact location of Kyrat. In 2021, Reddit user TsunamiX0147 discovered the exact location where Kyrat would exist in real life. I really hope people don't actually think that Kyrat's a real place, because it's obviously not. However, when making the fictional country, Ubisoft seemed to have designed the country's borders based on real-life borders. And lining up these borders, we can see that Kyrat is dead set in the middle of India, between East Champaran, Sitamarhi, Shiohar, and Muzaffarpur. This is pretty surprising because many Far Cry fans, myself included, assumed that Kyrat was where Nepal is in real life, since Kyrat looks to be designed after Nepal. Now, this is still a theory and not completely confirmed, but it looks very likely that Kyrat's borders were inspired after the borders of several districts in India. Now, TsunamiX0147 has a huge write-up about how they discovered this, so I'll link their Reddit post in the description. Go give it a read, because this post clearly took an insane amount of work to figure out. James Kenneth survives in co-op. James Kenneth is an extremely minor character that only appears in the Far Cry 5 DLC, Hours of Darkness. He serves as Redler's squad leader and primarily appears in the DLC's opening cutscene, though he does appear in the game's opening moments, where he's executed by the Viet Cong. However, it's actually possible for him to live. Kinda. If you play Hours of Darkness in co-op, Player 2's character model will be James Kenneth's player model. Although, this doesn't actually change the opening of the game. Kenneth still gets executed. So while he technically dies, he also technically lives. It's weird. Scrapped Pagan Min storyline. As revealed by Far Cry 4 creative director Alex Hutchinson on Twitter in May of 2018, one of the original ideas for Far Cry 4 was that during the game's story, Ajay would be able to choose to side with Pagan Min, and would be able to take back the outposts you've captured and give them back to Pagan Min. According to Hutchinson, this was cut from the game due to there not being enough time to implement the idea. Mutant cut level. Mutant is a cut level from the original Far Cry. The level would have taken place after the level Factory, and would have had Jack Carver surviving a helicopter crash. He'd wake up near a canyon and would have to battle a bunch of mercenaries and mutants. The player would travel through a cave, climb up a mountain, and locate a cabin. There, at the cabin, they would be able to contact Doyle, and finally, the level would end with Carver using a hang glider. This would lead into the original version of the level Dam, which was going to have a completely different opening section. This level could actually be played in the Far Cry Beta Aesthetics mod, a project that aims to add in all of Far Cry 1's cut content back into the game. Trials of the Blood Dragon. So you know Wolfenstein Youngblood, that really bad sequel to the really good Wolfenstein games that follows BJ's two daughters? Yeah, this is kind of like that. Trials of the Blood Dragon is a crossover game between Far Cry and the Trials series. The game has you playing as Rex Power Cult's daughters, Roxanne and Slater, as they travel through the worlds of Blood Dragon on their motorcycle equipped with a grappling hook. Although, you can actually get off the motorcycle and fight enemies in platforming sections. There's also other vehicles you can ride around in, like trucks and minecarts. There's 27 levels in the game, and unlike the other Trials games, there's no track editor, so there's no user-created tracks to play around with. It's just those 27 levels. When the game was released in June of 2016, it received mixed reviews. Trials fans enjoyed the new gameplay mechanics, while Far Cry fans were happy that Blood Dragon was acknowledged? Yeah, this game isn't really made for both Far Cry fans and Trials fans. It's mainly just for Trials fans. There's not really much here for Far Cry fans. But as of right now, it's the closest thing we have to Blood Dragon 2. Celine is Faith. Celine is a minor character in Far Cry New Dawn, and for some reason, some fans believe that she's Faith from Far Cry 5. They think this because some people believe that Faith never actually died in Far Cry 5, as most of the player's interactions with her are when they're hallucinating. So the idea is that Faith faked her death, survived the nukes, and started going by the name Celine. People think this because you can actually find the formula for bliss in the infirmary, which is where Celine works, suggesting that maybe Celine is trying to make some bliss. However, it's extremely easy to debunk this theory, as Celine mentions that she was in college when the bombs dropped. So by the time of New Dawn, she's in her mid-30s, while Faith is 24 at the time of Far Cry 5. So if she survived the events of the game, she would be 41 years old in Far Cry New Dawn. Also, Celine has a completely different accent from Faith's. So, yeah, it's pretty obvious that Celine isn't actually Faith, and Faith died in Far Cry 5. Far Cry VR, Dive into Insanity. Far Cry VR, Dive into Insanity is a VR first-person shooter set in the Rook Islands. The game allows for up to 8 players to work together to survive the islands and escape from Voss and his crew of pirates. The game has you playing through 5 levels, as you battle pirates and a horde of Voss clones. No, really, at one point in the game, you have to battle a swarm of Voss clones, all coming at you with machetes. There's even a part of the game that has you being watched over by a giant Voss staring at you from the sky. So you might be thinking, oh, this sounds interesting, I want to play this. Well, too bad. Because when I said it was released in June of 2021, I didn't mean released on consoles or PC. No, Dive into Insanity is exclusively available to play at venues hosted by Zero Latency VR. So in order to play this game, you need to locate the nearest Zero Latency VR venue, travel there, and hope you'll be able to play the game. Side note, very bold of Ubisoft to release a VR game that you have to travel to in order to play during the middle of the COVID pandemic. The original Far Cry 4. Originally, Far Cry 4 was going to be a direct sequel to Far Cry 3, and would be about Jason Brody getting stranded on yet another tropical island. This was scrapped extremely early into pre-production, because this idea was far too similar to Far Cry 3. So instead, Ubisoft began debating on having the game take place in either Russia or South America. These settings were ultimately scrapped for the Himalayas. But Longinus in Far Cry 4 does mention that he plans on traveling to South America after the events of Far Cry 4. So it's possible that around this time, Ubisoft were still considering creating a game that took place in South America. Joseph Seed-inspired Voss. In Far Cry 6's Voss DLC, the moment that Voss discovers the definition of insanity is actually shown. Turns out, he discovers this via a preacher on the TV. But what's interesting is that if you look closely at the preacher, they look really similar to Joseph Seed. This has led some fans to speculate that Voss got the definition of insanity line from Joseph Seed. However, there's a bit of a problem with this theory. Far Cry 3 is set in 2012, which means that this scene must take place prior to 2012. While we don't know exactly when Eden's Gate was founded, it's hinted in Far Cry 5 that it's been, at the very least, 5 to 6 years. And Far Cry 5 takes place in 2018. And of course, 6 years prior to 2018 is 2012, meaning that it's unlikely that Joseph would be preaching prior to the events of Far Cry 3. And the biggest problem is that the preacher in Voss's vision is clearly voiced by a different voice actor than Joseph's voice actor. And it's not like Ubisoft couldn't get Joseph's voice actor to record this scene. After all, his voice actor returned for the Joseph DLC, which was presumably being made at the same time as the Voss DLC. It's more than likely that this preacher was just using Joseph's character model in order to save time on having to make an entirely new character model for a background character who appears on a TV screen. Ajay nuked America. At the very end of Far Cry 6's Pagan Min DLC, it's revealed by Pagan Min, via a voicemail, that Pagan was tired of the United States meddling in his affairs. So, he purchased an entire nuclear stockpile and has all of the nukes aimed directly at the United States. Pagan mentions that he doesn't know exactly where in the US all of his nukes are pointed at, but guesses that it's someplace in Montana. He then tells Ajay to use them whenever he wants to, but to warn Pagan ahead of time if he does actually use them. This is hinting that Ajay was the one responsible for the nuke ending of Far Cry 5. So whatever happened in that conflict with America resulted in Ajay pressing the nuke button, which technically gives Ajay the highest kill count in the entire Far Cry franchise. Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is the final installment in the Far Cry Instinct series. Instead of Paradise Lost being a sequel, it's a remake of the original Far Cry Instincts. So it's a remake of a remake. Cool. Released in April of 2007, Paradise Lost is an arcade rail shooter that follows Jack Carver and their unnamed friend who go around a tropical island setting battling mercenaries, mutants, and Dilophosaurs. The game runs for about an hour, over the course of 5 levels. The game also features various boss fights, like the Mutant Chucker, Soldier X, Assault Chopper, Sarge, and Crow. The game plays like your standard rail shooter, and that's kind of it. In fact, you could argue that's the worst thing about the game. It's just a kinda standard rail shooter. There's no real twist to the game, and with the limited amount of enemy variation in the game, Paradise Lost can't really compete with other rail shooters. At least from what I've read about online. I haven't actually played the game myself. Last thing that I'll mention is that Paradise Lost had 2 different arcade cabinets. A sit-down cabinet with 2 seats, and a standing-up cabinet. Manga. Far Cry has actually entered the world of manga, with 2 different one-shots being released in Jump. The first is Happy Voss Day, written by Hiromu Nagase, And released in April of 2021, this story explores Voss's childhood and delves into how he went from a relatively normal kid into the insane pirate we see in Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 6. Kinda wish we stopped getting Voss flashback stuff because it kinda takes away from the mystique of the character, but oh well, I guess. That same month, there was another Far Cry manga released, but this one was a little bit weirder. Written by Same Tomoki, inside is a one-shot manga about a kid named Miyoshi who's obsessed with Far Cry 4. And while playing the game, he starts to question his own morality. He realizes that he relates to pagan men, and begins to wonder if he's really the villain, and that Far Cry 4 was made just to give the player an excuse to do whatever they wanted without consequences. And that was the last Far Cry manga for a couple of years. That was until May of 2024, when Far Cry Call the Herd was released. Written by Ryan Nichols, this story is about 4 Far Cry villains being transported into prehistoric times in a Battle Royale-esque situation. And by Far Cry villains, I mean Far Cry villains before they're Far Cry villains. So, when they were just kids. These villains being Voss, Pagan Min, Castillo, and Batari. Yeah, Batari from Far Cry Primal. Not Joseph or the Jackal. You would think with a title like Call the Herd, Jacob Seed would be there too, but nope. Although, I guess Jacob, and by extension Joseph and the Jackal, could appear down the line, as Call the Herd is intended to be a series that'll last 2 graphic novels. Now, before somebody says, this is a comic, not a manga, I don't know. I don't know. They keep calling it a manga in, like, press material, but, like, it looks like a comic. I don't know. Argue about it in the comments. The Grid. This is probably the most obscure Far Cry game ever made. Released sometime in 2012 on the Far Cry 3 Outpost website, The Grid is a puzzle game that required players to connect with Uplay. Basically, you moved around a data key in one of 4 directions. However, once you moved it, it wouldn't stop moving until it would hit a firewall or another data key. You would have to move the data key through a maze until it reaches the correct spot. However, you had to be careful because the data key could easily fall off the grid, ending the game. By completing levels, you would unlock XP for Far Cry 3's multiplayer and co-op, along with new multiplayer weapon mods. At some point in either 2018 or 2019, the game and the website it was hosted on, Far Cry 3 Outpost, was shut down. And this has led to the Grid becoming lost media, as there's no videos of the game online, or a way to play it. The only evidence of its existence are 2 screenshots. Far Cry 4 RPG 7 and Far Cry 5. In Far Cry 5, if you travel to the blocked-off tunnel near the Lamb of God Church in Holland Valley, you'll find an RPG 7 just lying around. At first glance, this isn't anything that weird, considering that the RPG is a weapon in Far Cry 5. However, if you take a closer look, you'll notice that it's not the Far Cry 5 RPG. It's the Far Cry 4 RPG 7. In fact, the game counts it as a different weapon than the standard RPG found in the game. Despite this RPG using the Far Cry 4 RPG 7 model and even the weapon's aim-down sights, it actually uses Far Cry 5's rocket model, so it's a weird hybrid between the 2 versions. This is the only spot in the base game you can actually find this weapon. All other RPGs are the default Far Cry 5 variant. It's been speculated that the Far Cry 4 model was being used as a placeholder, and for whatever reason, Ubisoft forgot to remove it in this exact location. Although, this RPG 7 model would return in the Hours of Darkness DLC. Faith's addicted to cocaine. It's mentioned in the game that Faith, prior to being taken in by Joseph, was a drug addict. However, some players, for some reason, think that she was just trying to manipulate the deputy and that she was never actually ever addicted to any drugs. This is a really weird theory because there's literally no evidence for it. Sheriff Whitehorse even confirms that Faith was addicted to hard drugs, so I don't really know why people think this. Also, Faith has the chemical formula for cocaine tattooed on her arm. And since Joseph and company like to tattoo the sins they've committed onto their bodies, this pretty much confirms that Faith was addicted to cocaine at one point in her life. The Banana Thief. In Far Cry 6, you can find a note at the GDP oil platform that mentions that somebody in Yara is stealing bananas from people. The note lists off 3 different locations where these crimes happened. If you actually head over to these locations, you'll find boxes of bananas with a photo of a real-life French bulldog, who I presume is some Ubisoft employee's dog. I guess that the dog just really likes stealing bananas. And I guess that in-universe, Donkey Kong lives in Yara and has a little pet French bulldog. Davenport Farm. Davenport Farm is a minor location in Far Cry 5 that at first glance just seems like a normal farm that just so happens to have a perk magazine for you. However, there's actually something weird going on at the farm. You can find a note there from the son of Mr. Davenport, where he confesses to... well, he thinks, I'm not actually going to say it. I'll just show you the notes. I'm not reading that out. Now, some may think that this is just your average, funny, weird Far Cry note. And while that's technically true, there's actually some backstory behind this note. You see, PC Gamer editor James Davenport wrote to Ubisoft and asked them to put in an Easter egg related to his dad in Far Cry 5, since his dad lives in Montana. So, yeah, James Davenport, Davenport Farm. This was Ubisoft's way of saying, sure, we'll reference your dad in the game, but we're also going to make you seem like a freak. Far Cry 3 Werewolf. This is a theory in the same vein as like Bigfoot in San Andreas or the Ratman in GTA 4. Some players back in 2012 claimed that you could find a werewolf running around the Rook Islands. I hate to be a killjoy, but this isn't true. Like, the only piece of evidence for its existence is a video made by a YouTuber called Aaron Prod. And his evidence is that he heard a wolf howl while he was on a hill. Considering that there's wolves in Far Cry 3, that's probably what it was. Far Cry 3 Dolls. In Far Cry 3, you can find a cabin on Hoyt's Island. Upon entering this cabin, you'll find a bunch of dolls hung up on the ceiling. You'll also see a doll missing some limbs lying on a table. The floor of the cabin also has various footprints that some players believe are covered in dried blood. This cabin is most likely a reference to the Island of the Dead Dolls, a small island in Mexico that's known worldwide for its thousands upon thousands of dolls strung up all across the island. This island is believed to be haunted by the spirit of a little girl who drowned, with the dolls being put up in order to please the spirit. Anyways, back to Far Cry 3, you can also find dolls in weird locations around the map. For example, you can find some dolls lying around on a tiny island south of Dr. Earnhardt's mansion, with some claiming that if you shoot the dolls, they'll bleed. Scary Far Cry 5 radio message. In Far Cry 5, very rarely in certain parts of the map, you can hear a radio message while inside of a car, truck, or plane. And it's pretty spooky. Here's a bit of it. It's hard to make out, but it's believed by players that the person behind the static is asking for help. While you can hear it in other parts of the map, most players believe the best way to discover it is by driving around in the northernmost part of the game, in Jacob's region. Fans believe that this has something to do with either the victims of Jacob's brainwashing, or something to do with the soon-to-be nuclear conflict the United States is involved in during the events of the game. But as of right now, nobody knows the answer, and no developer from Ubisoft has come out and commented on the mystery. And that, ladies, gentlemen, and MBs out there, is the Far Cry, or I guess was the Far Cry Iceberg. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I was really worried that while making it, they would they would announce Far Cry 7, and then I'd have to like put in like one or two entries about Far Cry 7. But as of right now, Far Cry 7 isn't announced. Although there are leaks about it, and honestly, if the leaks are true, I don't know. Like the leaks are about like it's gonna take place like in like a South Korean or North Korean, I guess you could say, inspired location where you'll have to like rescue your family, but there's like a time. It's like almost like a Dead Rising game where there's like a time limit you have to do, and I don't know. That doesn't really like that's fine for like a challenge thing, like that one Far Cry 4 DLC, but like. The whole game, like, isn't the whole point of Far Cry is that you can, like, explore the map at your own, like, pace? I'm not really big on that idea. I don't know. Maybe it's not even true. Who knows? But yeah, it was fun to look over the Far Cry franchise. I think it's a very underrated series. Like, yeah, it has some issues. Some of the games are a little samey, gameplay-wise, you could say. And obviously, you know, the Ubisoft Towers, but that's multiple Ubisoft games. And, you know, Ubisoft themselves is an awful company. I haven't done like a video game iceberg, like a proper video game iceberg in quite a while. Like there's the Cyberpunk 2077 one I did in September of last year, but that was also including like the RPGs, like, you know, the pen and paper RPGs and Cyberpunk Edge Runners, the anime. So like it was multiple things. This was like, I mean, yeah, there's entries about like the Far Cry movie and comics and whatever, but it was primarily the games. Like, it's more like this was like the Mass Effect iceberg or like the Halo iceberg. So it was fun to do that again. It's always fun to do like a video game iceberg. Next time around, it's going to be, well, actually, the next two icebergs are going to be big, pretty big ones. Very, very big ones. I won't go the second, I won't reveal the second one, but the next one is going to be the X-Men iceberg at long last. And then after that, I'll reveal later. But if you look at, I won't say it, but if you look at like what's being released in the next coming months, you could probably figure out an idea of like what it's going to be. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. It was fun. Leave in the comments below, like, who's your favorite Far Cry villain? Is it the Jackal? Is it the villain of Far Cry 1, who I do not know the name of? Is it Voss? Probably Voss. Pagan Min, Joseph, Faith, Castillo. Is it Mickey and Lou, I believe? Like the New Dawn villains? Probably not them. Is it the Primal villain, who I cannot remember the name of right now? Maybe you're an original, and your favorite is the Blood Dragon villain, Sloan, who I only remember the name of because I mentioned it in the Rip and Grinder, Grindor. Or Grinder? No, it is Grinder. As a Transformers fan, I'm used to saying Grindor because it's a character from Revenge of the Fallen. So whenever I see the word Grinder, I say Grindor. Yeah. My personal favorite's Joseph, just because I think the performance is fantastic. I mean, all the performances, like even Castillo's performance is fantastic, and he's not even like, in my opinion, that well. I mean, he's okay written. Like he's written all right, but like compared to like Voss, Pagan, and Joseph, like he's not as good. But yeah, anyways, guys, hope you have a good one. Stay safe and all that, and I will see you all in the X-Men Iceberg, which will be next, as I already said. Don't know why I'm repeating. Take care.
Between you and me, you should be outside playing in the sunshine instead of watching this bullshit.